Welcome, everyone, and good evening. I'm Elisa Liz Munoz, the Executive Director of the International Women's Media Foundation. Thank you for being with us tonight. It's an evening that we look forward to and work towards every day by asking ourselves whose courage stands out, whose work teaches us, and simply who stops the world in its tracks. And we know the answers because they are the winners of the IWMF's Courage in Journalism Awards, and I can't wait to introduce them to you. Before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the journalists risking their lives in Iran. 53 arrested at last count, many of them women, including journalists Nilufar Hamedi and Elahi Mohammadi, who reported on the story of Masa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman whose death in custody has led to the mass protests. They and many others have been held in Iran's notorious Evin prison, and they face serious charges. Let's not let their sacrifices be forgotten. The ability to recognize the extraordinary work being done by women in journalism around the world is not possible without your support. I am so pleased to acknowledge some of the organizations that enable our work. First and foremost, the Bank of America, our national presenting sponsor. 16 years of partnership and going strong. We are grateful for your continued commitment to elevate the work of the women we honor tonight, those who came before them, and those who will come after. And to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Bloomberg, CBS News, CNN, the Walt Disney Company, and Washington Post Live. And to all of our funders and sponsors, your support allows us to protect and encourage this collective of truth tellers around the world. Now let's take a brief look at the impact of our work. We are the IWMF, a global nonprofit organization breaking barriers for women and non-binary journalists. We've been working for more than 3 decades to protect, support, and promote changemakers in global news with programs, training, recognition, and emergency aid. Our diverse journalism is transformative. Last year, 315 fellowships and 100 reporting grants powered groundbreaking news, changing the way the world sees itself. We are ambitious, we are bold, we are built for who you are. Join us. That was the first of several videos we will share with you this evening. Our hope is that they give you a sense of what we do and what those who we honor this evening do every day. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this year's event chair, Catherine Murdoch. Catherine is an advocate for truth. She spent her early career in marketing and communications, serving for several years as Director of Strategy and Communications for the Clinton Climate Initiative. In 2014, she co-founded Quadrivium. The organization supports practical, evidence-based solutions for critical societal problems. Quadrivium has made restoring the health of democracy in the U.S. a focus. Catherine herself fights against disinformation. She supports struggling newsrooms, report on climate change, and U.S. electoral reform, to name just a few causes. She admits that she does not have all the answers. As she told the New York Times, "What I know and what I feel strongly is that sitting around and not doing anything is the wrong answer," a sentiment, it is safe to say, deeply shared by our honorees this evening. Please welcome Catherine Murdoch.
Thank you, Elisa, for that warm introduction. It is my honor to be here. We named our foundation Quadrivium because it means crossroads in Latin, and we believe that right now, our society is truly at a crossroads. Can we protect democracy, or will strong men prevail? Can we face truth in all its complexity, or will the appeal of simple ideologies block our view? Will we progress as a society, or will we move backwards, losing rights and freedoms we once had? The stakes are high. Why do we support journalism? Because the search for truth has never been more important, and the headwinds of disinformation are strong. Why do we support women? Because in many newsrooms, women's voices don't carry equal weight, and in many places, Women use their voices only at great risk. A great story can inspire action and often involves risk on the part of the journalist and the subject. The journalists we honor tonight include a photojournalist who has covered women, children, and global conflict for nearly 25 years, a journalist who has covered a history of deputy gangs in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, a journalist who reported on the Me Too movement in China and protests against extradition in Hong Kong, and finally, a journalist who told the truth about the war in her home country of Ukraine. Sadly, this reporting carries a personal cost. Each journalist we honor tonight has experienced multiple traumas. Many have been injured on the job, targeted with online abuse, kidnapped, or jailed. Sometimes all of the above. And yet they go on. They do so because they know there are more stories that must be told. Someone who understands this mission is a longtime friend of the IWMF, CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell. Norah has said that she grew up watching the great Barbara Walters as her own military family moved from base to base. Today, it is Norah's voice so many turn to for insight and explanation. Please join me in welcoming Norah O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for your very kind words. And I am so pleased to be with all of you, my friends at the IWMF, and this year's Courage Award winners. You know, in the past year, we have seen all kinds of stories that Catherine mentioned, the stories that stay with us. To cite just a few that connect to our winners' work, the aftermath of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan and the future for Afghan women, particularly school-age girls. The Olympic Games in Beijing unfolding against the backdrop, of China's human rights abuses, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a period of war that continues today, internal abuse and manipulation, often unreported within law enforcement agencies across the United States. What all these events share is simple. They are manifestations of global societal wrongs. The most devastating societal wrongs are those of choice, right? And what the best reporting does is to show us that a choice was made. It spells out, or it captures the repercussions. The stories the women that we honor tonight bring to light were astoundingly difficult to report. They did not produce them alone, as I can attest, because it does always take a safe, smart team of support. But these women are the leaders. They are at the helm, and it is their career and their life that is on the line. They do not turn away. So tonight, the IWMF lets them know they are not alone. Their work is appreciated, and we are all the better for it. I'm now pleased to introduce our first honoree. In her book, It's What I Do, it's a great book, American photojournalist Lindsay Addario wrote that at the start of her career, she became fascinated by the notion of dispelling stereotypes or misconceptions through photographs, of presenting the counterintuitive. Well, you may be familiar with Lindsay's work, and you may not even know it. It'd be hard to follow international conflict and not have seen her images. You may remember a recent photo she took. It was March of this year in Ukraine. It captured a family of 4 killed by mortar fire. Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed he was not targeting civilians, but the family was on a civilian evacuation route outside Kyiv, and so was Lindsay. Her photograph was published on the front page of the New York Times. It was on our broadcast. Even talking about it right now, I get the chills. It was not the first time we'll see her work, and it won't be the last. In the past 2 decades, if there has been a humanitarian crisis or conflict nearly anywhere in the world, chances are Lindsay was there. She has been kidnapped twice and been dismissed, harassed, harangued, and more. And yet she sees her job as a privilege. Here is more of Lindsay's work.
From Afghanistan to South Sudan, from Syria to Ukraine. Photojournalist Lindsay Addario has taken her camera to the scene of conflicts and humanitarian disasters for more than 2 decades. The images she's captured and the stories she's told have given the world an indelible perspective on these crises.
For me, the highest toll of war is civilian casualties. Yes. If I'm in a position and civilians are being killed, I have to document that. That is a very important part of the job of someone who covers conflict.
She has thrown herself into every conflict around the world, and we feel that the example that she is setting, not only with her work, but with her stories, is really valuable and critical to the journalism community.
Dario has worked in 70 countries as a contributor to outlets such as the New York Times, Time Magazine, and National Geographic. She's won a MacArthur Fellowship and a Pulitzer Prize. Her memoir sheds light on her life and work as a photojournalist. She's consistently put herself at great personal risk to be able to portray the risks and the awful costs borne by millions of citizens in conflict zones. Her focus on war's toll on civilians, women, and children makes her work uniquely powerful, and her ability to find stories that many journalists overlook or undervalue has become her signature.
Do you think, on balance, being a woman has been a help to you in this field?
A huge help. Being a woman
rather
is
than a
hindrance.
hindrance.
Yes, everyone thinks it's a hindrance, but in fact it's a huge help because people, first of all, have access to men and women, and people underestimate women, I find, and they still do, and so they sort of discount me and say, okay, sure, go do it.
Nice to be underestimated.
Yeah, I love being underestimated.
I love it.
It was especially meaningful for the IWMF to recognize the work of a world-renowned journalist who has dedicated 20 plus years of her career to documenting the stories of women and girls in conflict zones around the world.
So I want to thank the IWMF for this incredible honor. I'm really grateful to be recognized with this award. And first and foremost, I'd like to start out to thank all of the fixers, local journalists around the world, drivers, translators, who have often risked their lives to help me tell these stories and to help me open up their worlds to me and people in their communities, to gain access to people in their communities. So without them, I would absolutely not be able to do this job. A huge thank you to the New York Times Magazine, of course, Kathy Ryan, Megan Loram, Michelle McNally, who is no longer with us, and to National Geographic, Whitney Johnson, over the years, Sarah Lean, so many others who have really made it possible for this work to be seen. So without your backing, I wouldn't be able to do any of this work. And so I really appreciate your support. I think it's really important to talk a little bit about press freedom to make sure that we never lose sight of how important freedom of speech is and how important the work of journalism is to keeping the world aware of what's going on and to have perspective. There are so many journalists behind bars who have been killed or who have had their lives almost taken from them just because of the work they do. So it's important that we keep that pressure on to keep freedom of speech available around the world. And lastly, gender equity. I think, I hope one day we don't have to have an award solely dedicated to women. I have always said throughout the last 25 years that I hope one day there will be an equal number of women and men working both in conflict and in journalism throughout. And ideally one day that will happen. So thank you so much.
The IWMF is a lifeline for journalists in times of crisis, no matter the location and no matter the need. We must keep women in the field to hear the stories that matter most in our world. Last year, the IWMF directed nearly $200,000 in emergency funding to journalists in the United States alone. This year, the IWMF provided critical support to journalists in Ukraine who needed to leave the country, and to those who decided to stay and report on war crimes in their own backyard. In total, in 2021, we provided more than $3.2 million in direct support to 4,260 journalists in 124 countries. But the work isn't over. Join us.
A Los Angeles sheriff once said he wanted our next winner gone. Why? Well, in March of this year, Cerise Castle published a 15-part series for Knock LA titled A Tradition of Violence, the history of deputy gangs in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. Cerise reported on 18 deputy gangs and 19 murders, all of whom were people of color. She believes there are more murders. 19 is what she could prove. The project took time and money. Cerise and her team found that more than $100 million was paid out in settlements by the people of Los Angeles. Cerise researched and produced the Deputy Gang series while bedridden. She was recuperating from injuries sustained covering the killing of George Floyd. Cerise has since bonded with the families of those affected by deputy gang violence. She told a colleague during a 16-hour day, "I can't look these people in the eye and not try my best." Here is more about Cerise Castle.
When protests over the killing of George Floyd swept across the U.S. in 2020, Los Angeles-based multimedia journalist Cerise Castle went out to cover the uprisings that filled the streets of her city. Police armed with so-called less lethal weapons clashed with protesters. One of the officers fired a rubber bullet directly at her.
Although I identified myself as press, I was shot, and the resulting injuries landed me in the hospital. While I was bedridden, I started researching the history of the gangs in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
Cerise Castle thought she had material for one article, but as she continued to dig, she found more and more evidence linking killings by police to deputy gangs. After several legacy news outlets turned down her pitches, her work appeared as a 15-part series published by nonprofit community journalism project Knock LA.
Cerise stood out to the IWMF because of the incredible courage as a freelancer that it takes to hold one of the largest local police enforcement agencies in America to account. Her 15-part series that she produced and wrote on her own is exposing atrocities by this agency, the murder of 19 men of color, the payouts of $100 million from Los Angeles County to the victims' families, and all of this without the backing of a major media organization.
Since her series appeared, it sparked community engagement on the issue of police deputy gangs and led to public hearings before a civilian oversight commission. And it's changed Cerise Castle's life as well, but not all for the better.
Immediately after I released the first part of the series, I began receiving death threats. I regularly receive threatening messages on my social media.
She's had to hire security guards to protect her while she does her job, and she's had to invest in a bulletproof vest. She's faced retaliation and harassment from the department whose misconduct she exposed.
When I attempted to attend a press conference featuring the Sheriff's Department, I was detained.
It's so critical to hold police departments to account and to fight the narrative that is coming from their communications agencies. And Cerise's example should really be used by other journalists to report on their own what they see police doing behind the scenes.
I want to start by thanking the International Women's Media Foundation. So much of my work deals directly with violence at the hands of the state against the people that they are sworn to protect. People whose lives have been torn apart and forever changed. People with dreams who never had the chance to see them through. Too often, the press has ignored these stories and never questioned the motives of those armed forces. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has been responsible for the deaths and traumatization of thousands of people for generations. There are at least 20 criminal gangs inside of its ranks. They have tattoos, gang signs, and commit crimes like extortion, even murder. Many of them uphold racist ideologies and make sport out of the dehumanization of entire communities. Reporting on them has led to my surveillance, attempted doxing, and even death threats. That is just a sampling of what families who have been crying out for years have experienced. Already this year, 13 people in Los Angeles County have been shot by sheriff's deputies, and 8 of them have died. This award is recognition of the lives lived and lost. I hope it continues to inspire people to ask questions, welcome new perspectives, and to continue the fight for accountability. To my fellow honorees, it is a privilege to share this honor with you. To all of my editors, thank you for never wavering during the late nights, missed deadlines, or when things got dangerous. To our research assistants, your time and dedication is invaluable. To Ricky, thank you for making the data make sense. To my attorney, Susan Seeger, thank you for never backing down from a fight. To my girlfriend, Brittany, thank you for your unwavering support and your patience. This work is literally not possible without you, and it's a blessing to have you in my life. Thank you again to the IWMF, and thank you.
Keeping journalists safe is always important, but violence doesn't just happen physically. With the spread of and misinformation, being a journalist online has never been more challenging. Plus, women and non-binary journalists endure additional layers of abuse just for being who they are. That's why the IWMF offers both digital safety training and mental health grants. Because we believe the public needs news it can trust. And that requires keeping journalists safe wherever they are. Learn more at iwmf.org.
Good evening. I'm Suzanne Malveaux, co-chair of the IWMF's Board of Directors. I'm excited to be here with all of you this evening to introduce and get to know better this year's IWMF Gwen Ifill Award winner, McNelly Torres. This special award was created by the IWMF 6 years ago to honor Gwen Ifill's legacy, especially her work mentoring female journalists of color like myself, as well as her pioneering success in the news media. The IWMF recognizes her impact not only with the Gwen Ifill Award, but through the Gwen Ifill Mentorship Program. In its third year, the initiative pairs experienced industry mentors with younger, emerging leaders from underrepresented backgrounds to support their professional development. When I think back on my time with Gwen, I am not only reminded of her kindness and her smile, her inspiration as a friend in the industry, but also her courage, which propelled her to challenge the status quo and guided an entire generation of Black journalists. Tonight, we are going to learn how Gwen's legacy has also impacted McNelly, the award-winning investigative journalist. She is currently editor at the Center for Public Integrity. And she says this about Gwen's influence, quote, "Seeing Gwen on television at the news desk meant something for a lot of people. It meant, si se puede, yes, we can. It is such an honor to receive the award in her name and to be recognized for the work I love doing every day." So, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce McNelly Torres. Welcome, McNelly. Is that Frida in the background? That's the one benefit of doing this virtually.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. That is Frida. I love her. I'm a big fan.
We all love her. Tell me, first of all, what was Gwen's influence on your career? How did she impact how you saw your opportunities?
You know, I was never honored to meet her. You know, to before she passed away. I was really sad when she passed away. I had no idea that that she was sick. But to me, she was such a great role model. Just to watch her on TV, being there, the first Black woman to be on network television. And she had this huge legacy of, mentoring and helping, women of color in the business. And I do have mutual friends with her. So I always heard a lot of great things about her. And, to me, just watching her on TV meant a lot. And you are
really just a trailblazer and a force to be reckoned with in of yourself. Were there mentors that came along, people who you spotted and looked at? I saw Max Robinson and Jim Vance, Maureen Bunyan. Who were some of the people who you looked to as a guide, as a North Star, if you will, for your direction?
I had people, an array. And first of all, I gotta mention my grandmother in Puerto Rico. I was born and raised. And I think grandmothers are the best. My grandmother was ahead of her time. She was a feminist ahead of her time. She followed politics. I just grew up reading newspapers in her lap. So, and she was a fighter, and she had that fighting spirit. And she always told me, you need to educate yourself. You need to be independent. You need to be an independent thinker. Don't let anybody, cloud your mind. So she was my first mentor, and I miss her dearly. And but I also had a lot of people in the business along the way, from every job that I've had, that somehow I learned something, from them. But I have in the investigator world, thanks to the Investigative Reporters and Editors Organization, where I've been very active for many years, and I also serve on the board. Manny Garcia, Ron Nixon. I have a multiple of people that I really, really look up to and help me along the way, and I am very grateful for that.
Your work is extraordinary in the investigative field, and you have trained thousands of journalists in the United States, the Caribbean, and Puerto Rico, et cetera. And this has really been your emphasis, whether it's consumer rights, education, government, and crime. Why is it so important that there is Latino representation in investigative journalism? What have you discovered?
Why do we need more Latinos in news? Well, we all know that the Latino population in the United States, is huge, and we are not monolithic. So we come from different places, from different backgrounds. The Spanish we speak is different. So we need more Latinos, because that will make the stories better. You will see more representation in newsrooms across the nation, and I believe in that.
Do you think that you've already seen a difference in the industry? We know there's a big emphasis now on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, when you put on the skeptic or the journalist hat, you ask, how long is this going to last? Is it fleeting here, or are we putting down some real roots in terms of changing the industry to make the industry more reflective of society?
I've seen this. I've been doing this now for 20 years, plus, and I've seen the cycles. And the cycles, something happens, and there's a reaction. The industry is always reactive, right? And then things come down. They say, "Oh, diversity. We care about diversity," and then start hiring people. But I've seen a lot of mistakes along the way, and that's why now I talk a lot about it takes a village. It's not only hiring people, it's supporting them, it's giving them the tools that they need to succeed, right? To be successful in this career. But also, to me, diversity means nothing if you don't have equity, justice, and power. We need to be in the table where the decisions are made.
Absolutely. And the mission of the Center for Public Integrity, this is one of the country's oldest nonprofit news organizations. It's interesting how it has changed, because initially it really was about exposing and taking on abuses of power, dealing with the government and corporate interests. But now specifically, you are talking about really unveiling inequality in our society. How do you do that? What is that focus about? How do you expose inequality? And what kind of journalist training is required for that?
Yeah, we need all kinds of trainings to produce this kind of journalism. But to me, being at public integrity right now is very important. That's why I'm here working with my colleagues, because inequality is a topic that is very important. I was raised by a single mom. So I know what it's like to be poor. I grew up poor in Puerto Rico, the oldest of three girls. And, from as a young girl, I saw the inequities in the system, the inequities in society, and how that affects everything, how that affects the education, that you get, the health care that you get, the access, whether you qualify for this and that and the other, transportation. So we try to use data to produce this kind of stories, but they're not, they are not easy to produce, but they're not impossible.
And so finally, can you tell us, what do you think is going right? What are we getting right in the news media, in the business, and what do we still have a lot of work to do?
Well, I think that what we are getting right is that we are hiring people, more people of color in the newsrooms. I just think that, again, giving people the tools that they need to be successful, that has always been a challenge. I think also that the way that the media is covering what's happening in our country right now, I have, issues with that. It doesn't sometimes, the way that people of color still are being portrayed by the media is just not, there's no equity. And I think that that is a reflection of the fact that there are not enough editors, there are not enough executive producers and producers. There are people of color, because they understand the communities, they understand the issues at a more perfect level than other people.
Sure, sure. A lot of work that still needs to be done, and some sensitivity, obviously, around those issues, particularly in representing and covering various communities. Finally, McNelly, any advice that you want to give our young aspiring leaders, journalists that are part of this program, and really working very, very hard and trying to expose some of those inequities?
Never let anybody discourage you when you want to do something. Surround with different kind of people that can help you. Create a network. Again, it takes a village, right? So try to surround yourself to have a network that you can go to for this and that and the other. That's what I've done over the years myself. Don't let anybody discourage you. Don't let anybody say, "Oh, you cannot do that." I mean, use every mistake and every disappointment to just put more fire, put more fire and just keep you going. And that's what has kept me going all these years.
Well, we are so honored to have you part of our network now. Welcome to our network. We're going to be a part of your network. Thank you so much, McNelly Torres. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you for spending time with me.
Congratulations to McNelly Torres. Well, it is now time for the Wallace Annenberg Justice for Women Journalists Award. It is presented annually to a woman journalist who is unjustly imprisoned. Shu-Chin Wang, known as Sophia, is an activist and investigative reporter covering human rights and gender inequality in China. For several years, Sophia watched the Me Too movement sweep the U.S. and take root in other countries. Why, she wondered, was there silence in China? Sophia bravely shared her own story of sexual harassment. She also created an anonymous online poll to ask if other women journalists experienced anything similar. More than 80% said yes. Sophia went on to report a high-profile case of sexual harassment. It received more than 3 million views on the day that it ran. Well, in 2019, she traveled home from her home in Guangzhou to Hong Kong to report on the peaceful protests against the new extradition law. Sophia wrote, quote, "Information and news can be blocked, and reality and truth can be distorted. But having personally experienced it and witnessed it, you can't pretend to be ignorant." Well, in October 2019, she was detained for 3 months. 2 years later, in September 2021, on the way to begin graduate studies abroad, Sophia vanished. It is believed that she is being held in one of China's black jails on charges of inciting subversion of state power. The IWMF's recognition of Sophia is a call for justice on her behalf. We call for her release so that she can be reunited with her family and continue her critical reporting. Journalism is not a crime.
如官方同我講叫我停止，我睇下會同佢哋協商咯，更加多呢種協商嘅態度。但我唔想停咯，我自己嘅諗法就係我已經做咗，我就想堅持落去做，因為我覺得我做緊呢件事係對嘅。
As the Me Too movement was gaining global recognition in October 2017, Chinese journalist Sophia Zhu Huang conducted a survey on women journalists in the country who had experienced sexual harassment. Based on this survey, an official report was released in March 2018, kickstarting China's Me Too movement and revealing widespread sexual harassment in Chinese journalism.
She is very brave to report the truth, to show the truth of the Hong Kong movement. And it launched a huge social movement in China, even until now.
This led to Sophia becoming one of China's most high-profile women's rights campaigners and journalists.
I was thinking to start a Me Too in China too, but because the Chinese people are so conservative, none of the female journalists said, okay, I'm going to do it with me. So I feel like I need to do it in a different way.
Her breakthrough journalism garnered her a prestigious Chevening Scholarship funded by the British government to pursue gender studies at the University of Sussex. However, on September 19, 2021, Sophia and another activist, Wang Jianbing, disappeared before they were scheduled to board a plane to the UK to pursue the scholarship. They were believed to have been detained on charges of subversion of state power.
The IWMF chose Sophia for the IWMF's Justice for Women Journalists Award because of her remarkable work around the Me Too movement, which ultimately led to her disappearance. The point of this award is to bring attention back to journalists who have been imprisoned and whose cases need attention. This is an effort to bring that attention back to Sophia, who exposed some of the most famous cases in China and really brought the movement to the Chinese public.
With September marking the one-year anniversary of Sophia's disappearance, her family and friends in China can only hope and wait to see her again soon.
I don't know what's your situation, but I just hope you can take care of yourself and don't give up any times. We will try our best to release you. We will see you again.
China has one of the worst records for press freedom in the world, and bringing attention to that record is also really very important to the IWMF, and through Sophia's case, we're able to do that.
The IWMF received the following statement from Sophia's family and friends to mark the receipt of this honor. As friends of Sophia, we believe that if she were here receiving the Courage in Journalism Award tonight, she would express gratitude for the IWMF and then acknowledge her friends and peers for their pursuit of justice and democratic rights in the face of increasing censorship. Sophia believes in the importance of acknowledging unsung heroes, which is critical to change the current societal state in China. The processes of social change must be aligned with the collective's imagined outcome. A second point that Sophia would make is that journalism is not a crime, a statement that she wrote on a piece of paper she managed to smuggle out of the detention center where authorities first detained her for 3 months in 2019. This is something that she deeply believes in and continued to speak on both in writing and at speaking engagements. Through example, Sophia has demonstrated that a journalist's responsibility is to speak out and to renew hope when despair overwhelms. An investigative journalist who spent the first part of her career uncovering political corruption and abuses in South China at a time when this work was still tolerated by the Communist Party, Sophia is a shining example of journalism that gives voice to the marginalized and holds people to account. These values fuel the reporting and advocacy work that Sophia has undertaken, helping to kickstart China's Me Too movement. It is this kind of work that eventually landed Sophia on the Chinese authorities' blacklist. Her friends and peers in China and around the world are hopeful that one day Sophia may be free and be able to accept this award on her own accord, as well as other journalism honors, which she deeply deserves. That was beautifully said, and our thoughts are with Sophia and her family. We have come to our final Courage Award winner this evening. Victoria Roshina is a freelance journalist working in her home country of Ukraine. On March 11th, she published a report on her life in Endohodar, the city next to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. She wrote about being shot at and shelled by Russian tanks despite traveling in a car marked press. Well, the Russians stole her laptop, they stole her video camera, and much more. Well, on March 12th, Victoria was on her way to Mariupol, where up to 300,000 residents were effectively being held hostage. Remember that? Well, then she was seized by the Russians. She was released on March 21st, and she reported on her detainment on Facebook. She wrote, "The occupiers shoot at civilians living there. They are turning the life of people into hell. They took away my technology, but they will not take away my wish to tell the truth about their crimes." Victoria has a knack for capturing pivotal, often unreported moments of how conflict affects communities. As a local fisherman told her, "Today, for the first time in all these days of war, I went to the water again. I felt a little calmer." So congratulations to Victoria Roshina.
The world watched in horror as the Russian invasion of Ukraine began in February of 2022. In the months since, Ukrainian journalists have worked tirelessly at great personal risk to tell the story of the war. Among them is freelance journalist Victoria Roshina, who since the war's outbreak has been reporting from Russian-occupied territories.
She's the only Ukrainian journalist I know who's been reporting from the occupied territories for one of the most respected, if not the most, to me, the most respected newspapers in Ukraine, Ukrainskaya Pravda, Ukrainian Truth.
Despite being detained twice by Russian forces, once for almost 2 weeks, Victoria has not backed down and continues to report from the front lines.
Instead of going back home to Kyiv, she just found a way, she borrowed money, she got herself all the equipment she needed to go back to the field and continue to report on the front lines. By now, it's been more than half a year. Victoria Roshina has hardly left the front lines.
One of the reasons that we selected Victoria for the Courage in Journalism Awards was her extraordinary bravery, the strength that it takes to run towards danger, knowing full well what the consequences might be, really made her stand out. We wanted to recognize her also as a symbol of recognition of the incredible work that Ukrainian journalists are doing covering their own conflict.
From the start of the war, Victoria has continued to hold power to account by reporting on what is happening to her fellow Ukrainians.
She asked the driver to take her to where Russian tanks were, and Victoria, without any weapons, she goes to the area where tanks are fighting, and she wants to see that battle with her own eyes.
It's so important to have journalists on the ground in Ukraine and to have local journalists on the ground. They are the ones that are documenting the atrocities that are taking place, and ultimately their record will be used to hold people to account, which is what journalism is meant to do.
There is an expression in the Russian language, the only warrior in the field, and she's that warrior.
Victoria is still reporting from the front lines of Ukraine. She felt strongly about staying in her home country to document the atrocities of war. Tonight, I'm honored to read some remarks that she sent to the IWMF. "I am Ukrainian, and I have never felt the value of these words as much as now. Since February 24th, the life of every Ukrainian has changed. Russia and Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale war against our country. Almost every citizen became a soldier, including journalists, warriors of the information front. We have remained faithful to our mission to convey the truth to the world, countering Russian propaganda. Unfortunately, many journalists have died. I want to dedicate this award to them. After all, they died in the fight for the truth, trying to record Russian crimes. I thank them. Freedom is expensive, said the murdered Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov in one of his last posts. The Russian occupiers are encroaching on freedom, trying to silence the most active Ukrainians. When representatives of the FSB of the Russian Federation held me captive for a week, I dreamed of the opportunity to continue my work. I understood that they were afraid of objective coverage of the war. I also want to thank all of the foreign journalists who covered the war and show the world the crimes of Russia. I beg you not to stop. And I ask all journalists to protect themselves because courage is always second to danger and risk. I saw the eyes of the occupiers. They do not have the will and will never have the same fire as the Ukrainians because they lack motivation. They are fighting on Putin's orders, and we are fighting for our independence. And we will win. Glory to Ukraine. From all of us at the IWMF, congratulations, Victoria, and please stay safe.
Today's early career journalists are tomorrow's newsroom leaders. The opportunities they receive today will determine if and how long they stay in the industry. That's why the IWMF invests in programs that train journalists and provide mentorship opportunities so they see themselves in the future of news. From supporting Afghan women in exile to developing inclusive safety trainers to mentoring women of color, we know these voices and these identities matter. The IWMF wants to change newsroom culture to be more protective, inclusive, and diverse. Join us.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Catherine, for joining us this evening and sharing your commitment to the IWMF and to our Courage Awards. And congratulations to all of our winners tonight. The IWMF stands with you now and always. For those of you tuning in around the world, if our message resonates with you, please consider supporting the IWMF. We are fundraising for our emergency fund for women journalists, which provides crucial lifeline to women and non-binary journalists by providing life-saving protective gear, medical and mental health support, relocation assistance, legal support, and much more. And as you've heard tonight, every day is becoming more dangerous for journalists. These women have put their lives on the line to report the truth. Our emergency fund is sustained solely by individuals like you. And tonight we ask you to consider supporting the IWMF however you are able. To date, the IWMF has honored more than 100 groundbreaking journalists in 56 countries with the Courage Awards. Many of our objectives, the most important one, is letting these women know that they are not alone. They are supported and their work matters. Your support allows them and journalists like them to stay in the field. To donate to our emergency fund, you can visit the bit.ly link on the bottom of your screen or go to courage.iwmf.org and click donate. And from all of us at the IWMF, thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. And that brings us to the end of our event. I hope you are inspired by the level of work, the risks that are taken, and the lessons that are taught through the journalism presented tonight by Lindsay, Cerise, McNelly, Sophia, and Victoria. It has been an honor to spend time with you, and I encourage you to stay connected to the IWMF and the importance of gender equity in news media. Good night, everyone.